In the 41st millennium, the Imperium of Man is a totalitarian, absolute monarchy, a vast empire made up of countless fiefdoms ruled by highborn nobility. These rulers control trillions of lives with an iron fist, the fingers of which consist of propaganda, indoctrination, religious persecution, blind intolerance, and the ever-present threat of violent retaliation to whomever dares to challenge the status quo. The Emperor of Mankind, both ruler and god of the Imperium, rules a million worlds from the life-sustaining prison that is the Golden Throne, his psychic might guiding the Astronomicon so that his empire might stay intact just a little bit longer. His will, carried out by the paranoid, power-hungry, bureaucratic High Lords, looms over the heads of 1 trillion humans on 1 million worlds, demanding obedience and faith unto death. His beloved Imperium is beset on all sides by Xenos, raiders, pirates, and the traitorous hosts of the Chaos Gods. War rages on 1,000 fronts across the void, billions of men, women, and children dying for his glory, even as new planets are colonized and old planets are left naught but ash. Within this eternal war zone, his blessed agents conduct their business, burning the witch, slaying the heretic, and destroying the Xenos wherever they are found. Nowhere is safe for the wayward mind, no dissent will be brooked, and no good deed goes unpunished. The people of the Imperium are expected to lay down their lives in service to Heon Terra, unthinkingly sacrificing themselves to a god who never wanted to be, and will likely never protect them. Above these loyal servants are his angels, transhuman soldiers that have long since left humanity behind. They lead an alien existence, their personalities neutered by indoctrination and their bodies twisted by ancient ritualized fleshcraft from the dawn of the empire they serve. They are the Emperor's weapons of war, bestriding only the most cataclysmic of war zones in an effort to destroy all that would oppose their might, hailed as lords by those they were created to serve. Above even these warriors are the Primarchs, demigods of staggering ability that were thought lost 10,000 years past, but who are now returning to their father's broken empire, though not always with good intentions. This was never the Emperor's vision. If he had eyes left with which to see what his Imperium has become, he would weep at its decay, a wound that has festered for 10,000 years, destroying what he saw as the only way for humanity to thrive. So today, I wanted to ask, how did it come to this? How did the Imperium rise and fall? What was the driving ethos the Emperor followed? And how was it perverted from its seemingly noble roots, if they were ever truly noble at all? And to begin answering that question, we have to return to the moment that planted the seed of domination in the Emperor's mind, to ancient Anatolia, by the banks of the Sakarya River, around 8000 BC. The boy who would be king held his father's skull in his hands. He turned it slowly, running his fingertips across the contours of skinless bone. A thumb, still browned with field dirt, traced across the blunt ivory pegs of a gap-toothed death smile. He lifted his eyes to the stone shelf where the other skulls sat in silent vigil. They stared into the hut's gloomy confines, their eyes replaced by smooth stones, their faces restored in the crude artistry of clay. It was the boy's place to remake his father's face in the same way, sculpting the familiar features with wet mud and slow swipes of a flint knife, then letting the skull bake dry in the high sun. The boy thought he might use seashells for the eyes, if he could barter with the coastal traders for two that were smooth enough. He would do this soon. Such things were tradition. First, he needed answers. He turned the skull once more, circling his thumb around the ragged hole broken into the bone. He didn't need to close his eyes and meditate to know the truth. He didn't need to pray for his father's spirit to tell him what happened. He simply touched the hole in his father's head, and at once he knew. He saw the fall of the bronze knife from behind. He saw his father fall into the mud. He saw everything that had happened leading to this moment in time. The boy who would be king rose from the floor of his family's hut and walked out into the settlement, his father's skull clutched in one hand. Mud brick huts lined both sides of the river. The wheat fields to the east were a patchwork sea of dark gold beneath the eye of the setting sun. The village was never truly quiet, even after the day's work was done. Families talked and laughed and fought. Dogs barked for attention and whined for food. The wind set the scrubland trees to singing, with the hiss of leaves and the creak of branches forming their eternal song. A ragged dog growled as the boy passed, yet fled yelping when he gave it no more than a glance. A carrion bird, hunchbacked and evil of eye, cried out above the village. A pack of other ragged children moved aside when he drew near, their ball game fading away and their eyes lowering. His barefooted walk took him unerringly to the home of his father's brother. The man, darkened and hardened by his years in the fields, was sat outside the mud brick hut, threading beads onto a string for his youngest daughter. The boy's uncle uttered the sound that meant the boy's name. In response to this greeting, the boy held up his father's skull. Many centuries after these events, citizens of even civilized and advanced cultures would often misunderstand exactly what a myocardial infarction was. The savage, constricting pain in the chest was due to blood no longer flowing cleanly through the heart's passages, causing harm to the myocardium tissue of the heart itself. Put simply, the core of the human being runs dry, trying to function with no oxygenated lubricant. This happened to the boy's uncle when he set eyes upon the skull of his murdered brother. The boy who would be king watched with neither remorse nor any particular hostility. He looked on as his uncle slid from his crouch onto the mud, clutching at his treacherous chest. He watched as his uncle's sun-darkened features pinched close, ugly and tight in supreme agony as the older man shook with the onset of convulsions. He saw the necklace slip from his uncle's grip, the necklace that was being made for his young cousin, and would now never be finished. Others came running. They shouted, they cried, they made the noises of language that spoke of panic and sorrow in a Proto-Indo-European tongue that would come to be known as an early precursor to the Hittite dialect. The boy walked away, heading back towards his family's hut. On the way, he turned to a figure, the giant, clad in gold, who walked nearby. Nordafric war clan tattoos curled on the towering warrior's face, curling from his temples to follow the curves of his cheekbones. The serpentine ink curves, white against his dark flesh, ended upon his chin just below his mouth. "Hello, Ra," the boy said in a tongue that wouldn't be spoken on this world for many thousands of years. Their language was called High Gothic by those that would come to speak it. The golden warrior, Ra, went to one knee, dazed at the sight of terror that hadn't existed for millennia, a clean and fertile place still untouched by war. This world wasn't really terror at all. It was still Earth. With the giant kneeling and the boy standing before him, it was far easier to meet each other's eyes. "My emperor," said the custodian. The boy rested a hand on the giant's chestplate, the fingers dark against the royal eagle. The boy's farm-worked palm, already rough despite his youth, ran along one golden wing. His expression was reflective, if not entirely serene. He didn't smile. The man that this boy would become never smiled either. "You have never shown me this memory before," Ra said. The boy stared at him. "No, I have not. This is where it all began, Ra. Here on the banks of the Sakaya River." The boy turned his old eyes to the river itself. "So much water, so much life. If I had been disappointed by the galaxy's wonders, it is only because we were fortunate enough to grow in such a cradle. There was so much to learn, Ra, so much to know. It pleases me for you to see what it once was." The custodian inclined his head, causing the servos in his collar to purr. "I have given you my report, sire. Why do you keep me here?" "So I may illuminate you," the boy replied, speaking with a patience that bordered on the preternatural. "You watched that man die, did you not?" Ra looked back over his shoulder, where the village folk were gathered around the fallen man, weeping and comforting in a loose, unwashed herd. "I did." "That was my uncle, my father's brother." "You killed him," the custodian said without judgment. "Yes, he struck my father from behind with a piece of sharpened bronze too poorly made to even be called a knife. Men had killed one another for generations before my birth, but this was the first slaying that had resonance to me, that changed my existence. It was illuminating." He paused for a moment, following Ra's gaze back to the noisy villagers. "The very first murder was also a fratricide," he said without emotion. "Thousands of years before this, when men and women still owed as much to apes as to the form we know now. But it is curious to me. Brothers have always killed brothers. I wonder why that is. Some evolutionary flaw? Some ingrained emotional fragility written into mankind's core, perhaps?" Ra shook his head. "I have no way of knowing the emotions at hand, sire. I have no brothers." "I was being rhetorical, Ra." The boy took a breath. This night was significant not for the murder, but for the deliverance of justice. For my uncle's deed, I stopped his heart's function and forced him to die. In eras to come, this will be called the Lex Talionis, the law of retaliation, or more simply, an eye for an eye. It is justice itself. Hundreds of human cultures through time will embrace it. Some will do so out of brutality, others from ideals that they believe to be fair and enlightened. But it is a precept that runs through the marrow of our species. Ra pulled his gaze away from the weeping humans. He heard his sire's words, he knew the history and philosophy behind them, but the reason for them yet eluded him. His doubt plainly showed on his face, for the boy inclined his head in recognition. I told you that this is where it all began, the boy said. Culture, the warrior replied. Civilization? The boy's momentary silence told Ra that he had guessed wrong. We are not far removed from those beginnings, Ra, either in distance or time. You could walk to the cradle of civilization from here, where men and women made the very first city. When I leave this village, that is where I will go. That journey is coming soon. But no, that is not what I mean when I speak of beginnings. The boy turned the skull over in his hands, just as he had done in the hut before. This is where I first learned the truth behind our species. This very eve, as I held my father's skull and considered how to restore his features according to our burial rites. When I first learned of his murder, it was a revelation into the heart of all mankind. This is a world that has no need of you yet, Ra. It has no need for imperial bodyguards, for it is a world that knows nothing of emperors, or warlords, or conquerors, and therefore it knows nothing of unity, nothing of law. You speak of leadership, the custodian said. Not quite. Every village already had leaders. Every family had patriarchs and matriarchs. I speak of kings, givers of law, rulers of cultures, not merely those who give orders, but those whose decisions keep a civilization bound together. This was the night I realized that mankind must be ruled. It could not be trusted to thrive without a master. It needed to be guided and shaped, bound by laws and set to follow the course laid by its wisest minds. I personally believe that the Emperor is telling the truth here, though Ra does question whether or not these events truly took place. It was here by the Sakaya River that the Emperor claims to have had his revelation. He speaks of the murder and the justice he enacted as a singularly transformative event that set him upon the course he has followed for all of recorded history. Here we see the birth of the Emperor's driving ethos, the idea that in order to thrive, humanity must be ruled, dominated and brought into line with the vision of those with the foresight required to show the way, amongst which the Emperor was the greatest by far. This ideology is rooted in sacrifice, not just of oneself, but of countless others for the greater whole. It was not individual humans that the Emperor sought to raise up to a greater existence, but humanity as a whole. His plan could not be altered to spare the individual. The race must endure, no matter the cost. The twin pillar of this guiding principle was the abolition of religion and the establishment of stable sections of the webway for humanity to use to traverse the galaxy. Through his dealings with the warp, the Emperor would conclude that in order for the influence of the Chaos Gods to be cut off, humanity must follow the truth of the tangible universe over any gods. This ideology of empirical evidence and science over faith would become the imperial truth, and was the guiding philosophy for his Imperium while he worked to provide an alternative to warp travel. Over the following 38,000 years, the Emperor began to enact his grand vision for humanity's future, attempting through subtle dominance to shepherd humanity to become something greater, his psychic abilities allowing him to take whatever form best suited the moment, be it man, woman, king, or pauper. Along the way, he would meet various others like himself, perpetuals such as Erda, or the first doomed war master, Alanius Persson. Together, they would use their longevity to guide humanity along a path that only they could follow, the scale of their existence stretching their perspective across millennia, long enough to both remember the mistakes of the past and shape a future worthy of the Emperor's vision. Though even then, the Emperor was still the only one who could fully grasp his vision for the future. His unwillingness to slow or alter course caused friction amongst he and the other perpetuals. All eventually left him, either falling into obscurity or directly opposing his plans. Few remained by the time he emerged as the Emperor: Erda, the mother of the Primarchs, Malkador the Sigillite, and Olivia Sureka, who he left on the planet Moloch after he had travelled there towards the end of the Age of Strife in M29 to bargain with the Chaos Gods. Like Prometheus before him, the Emperor entered the warp there and stole fire from the gods, beginning the final stage of his plans that we know of: the rise of the Imperium of Man, the start of the Webway project, and the birth of the Primarchs. Between 550 M30 and around 600 M30, the Emperor would don his final mantle, emerging from obscurity at the end of the Age of Strife with an army of genetically modified super soldiers known as the Thunder Warriors and loyal human soldiers at his back. He would crush all who stood in his way, warlords such as Cardinal Tang of the Indonesian bloc, Nathan Duma of the Pan-Pacific Empire, the priest king of Molan Sen, the ethnarch of the Caucasus Wastes, and many, many more in what would become known as the Unification Wars. Through these victories, he would prepare for the next stage of his conquest and unification of humanity, creating the Primarchs, perfecting their legions, building the Astronomicon and the Telepathica, the Adeptus Custodes, all other branches of government that would be needed in the coming centuries, and finally conducting the violent purge of the Thunder Warriors on Mount Ararat around 669 M30. The first active Astartes of the First Legion would join the Custodes in the slaughter. The formal end of the Unification Wars would be announced 13 years later. This brings us to one of the first major disruptions to the Emperor's plans, an event that would drastically alter the course of the Crusade, caused by the very person that had acted as the genetic mother to the Primarchs. Somewhere between 644.M30 and 792.M30, the infant Primarchs were stolen away from the Emperor's laboratories under the Himalayas and sucked into a warp rift, their amniotic chambers ripped from their mountings and sent scattering across the known galaxy, spending varying amounts of time within the warp itself before being released to land on various planets. Whether or not there was a meaning to which Primarchs landed where is still unknown. Few seem to have been outwardly changed by the experience, but being raised outside of the Emperor's control resulted in demigods that were more products of their environments than the Emperor's gene labs. Some planets broke their Primarchs, while others were subjugated by them. But all were irrevocably changed by their surroundings. The template corrupted. The true cause of this scouring is shrouded in ambiguity. It may have been Argel Tal and his men, sent back in time through warpcraft to destroy Gellerfield generators. It could have been the Emperor himself. Several Primarchs seem to subscribe to this theory, but it was Erda, mother of the Primarchs, that claimed to have been responsible. She saw the Primarchs as too dangerous to exist, the potential for devastation too high if she allowed them to be raised in the Emperor's image, calling it a twisting of what our ascension was supposed to be. So she acted against him, opening the warp rift herself, taking away the Emperor's would-be generals at the most critical stage of his plans, all in order to save them from their father. She then exiled herself to Mauritania in Africa to live a simple existence near her birthplace, taking with her a single space marine, Litu. The Emperor's plans had to change. His sons could no longer be raised on Terra, nor could they act as the fathers to the legions they had been ripped away from. A galaxy-wide search would be needed if the Emperor was going to bring his sons back into the fold. And so, in 789 M30, the Emperor was forced to start the Great Crusade without his 20 generals, venturing out into the dark to find his sons and bring them back into the fold. And it was during this time that we see the Emperor's flaws come out in full. His inability to slow course, the brutal reality of his ethos, and the nature of the demigod sons he had created would put the Imperium of Man on a collision course with catastrophe. It would take the Emperor almost 200 years to recover all of his sons. In that time they would grow, many of them becoming the rulers of their respective worlds. And in the beginning, the Emperor did find time to be a true father to some. Those found earliest such as Magnus, Ferrus, Fulgrim, and Horus, who boasted an especially strong bond with his father. With some, he took the time to understand them and win them over through persuasion and common cause, approaching many as a humble traveller at first, only to reveal himself later, such as in the case of Vulcan. But to others he was colder. The discovery of Angron stands out in this regard, as when he pulled the Primarch away from his brothers and sisters, his fellow warriors, and left them to die to the brutal tyrants that ruled their world and had mutilated Angron's mind, a glimpse of his unbendable ethos once again shows through.
If you are so mighty, why not help us? Why not step down from your golden palace here, down into the mud where the real struggle is borne out? Instead, you rip me from my destiny, from the only chance I ever had to grasp serenity. To fall a free man, beside those with whom I twisted the rope and cast off the shackles.
Because I am the Emperor, and my eyes are set upon this galaxy, all her stars and worlds, and not simply the wars or tyrants of any single one. So shall your eyes be set, as you take up the mantle you were brought into this life to bear, the mantle of Primarch, to command your legion and unite the stars beneath my banner. Something cold and crumbling welled up inside Angron at those words. It was the same sickening realization he had had on the cliff. The reason why this emperor, this blazing, incomprehensible being, had robbed him of a noble death. Why he hadn't let Angron fall with his brothers and sisters as he'd sworn he would. He needed Angron, just like the High Riders did. Bloodsport on the hot dust, conquest of the galaxy. It was all the same. Two different masters, but in the end, Angron was always the slave.
I died down there,
Angron said bitterly, drawing the Radiant Emperor into his fiery gaze.
With my brothers and sisters, freezing, starving and free. Emperor or no, creator or no, all you will ever get of me is a shell. The ghost of Angron, who never left Nuceria.
The Emperor looked back at him, expressionless and aloof. Angron felt static crawl over his skin and the reek of ozone flood his nose. Then a ghost will have to suffice. The Emperor held to his driving ethos even in the face of his son's suffering. He cannot trouble himself with the woes of a single man or a single army where appeasing the tyrant they fight is more pragmatic. He proves this when he allows the nobility of Nuceria, who butchered his son's brain, to join the Imperium. He is working for the benefit of humanity, not individual humans, and it makes him cold to even those who he should wish to help the most. Obviously, there's nuance to the Emperor's behavior. He's been slowly shepherding his plans for the last 30,000 years, set on a course that in his mind cannot be altered. Laid out before him is his single essential path for humanity, and he's quickly reaching the most critical stage. The Webway project that he so desperately needs to get back to is, in his mind, the only way for humanity to be free of the warp. Clearly, even a being like the Emperor would be desperate to complete it. He knows that the Chaos Gods won't take his theft of their power lightly, and every year that he delays, he risks disaster. So within that context, his treatment of Angron, though cruel, makes sense. The triumph at Ulanor in 000.m31 and the controversial Council of Nicaea a year later truly marked the beginning of the end for the Emperor's plans. Until that point, the Emperor had maintained control by personally having his hands on the reins, fighting side by side with his sons and maintaining a public image. But the appointment of Horus as Warmaster and his retreat to Terra in order to pursue the mysterious and secretive Webway project was, to many, a sign that he had abandoned them. Generations of people had served and died on the battlefields of the Great Crusade, and the sudden absence of the figurehead of their cause left his armies under the command of a charismatic, ambitious, and prideful leader who was fundamentally unable to admit when he needed help, and who took the usurpation of the running of the Imperium by what he saw as mere scribes and scriveners as a personal insult. This, combined with the corruption of the word-bearers and their Primarch Lorgar at Cadia a few years earlier, meant that the powers of chaos had both a target to corrupt and the means with which to do it. The lodges that they propagated throughout the legions, while ostensibly simple brotherhoods of like-minded warriors, served to sow dissent and discontent where they were able. But even as resentment filled the hearts of the soldiers that had given so much for his Imperium, the seed of faith was planted in others. The Lectitio Divinitatis, first penned by Lorgar himself before his corruption, had made its way into the hands of the common man. Printed, edited and reprinted, faith in the Emperor slowly spread through the Imperium. Quiet chapels in the bowels of ships, serving as the womb for what would become the cult of the Emperor, a faith that the Emperor would decry unto his death. The scales had begun to tip. Fate aligned to the Chaos God's goals, and as treachery was revealed, catastrophe would follow in the wake of Magnus's folly.
I carry his ambition to rule. While the conquest of the galaxy lay before us, that was enough. But now we are nearing the end. There is a Cretan proverb that says that peace is always over there. But that is no longer true. It is within our grasp. The job is almost done, and what is left for a man of ambition when the work is over?
In 004 M31, on a small moon above the planet Davin, Horus would be fatally wounded. Enraged and personally slighted by the betrayal of a once loyal friend, Yugen Temba, Horus would lead his men personally in an attack on Temba's grounded flagship, the Glory of Terror. During his battle, he would be cut off from his forces while within the flagship. Seeing no other option and believing himself capable of dealing with whatever lay ahead of him, Horus would duel the traitor governor alone on the ship's bridge. Empowered by a chaos blade known as the Anatheme, secretly stolen from a starfaring civilization called the Interrex and gifted to him by the traitor Erebus, Temba would prove to be a deadly foe. Whispering Horus's name to the blade, he was given fell strength and agility, parrying or simply enduring all of the War Master's blows despite his horrific, bloated appearance. He was nigh unkillable, and in a horrific instant, Temba would wound Horus, a small cut to the shoulder that would prove near fatal, the Anatheme's fell energies flooding into Horus. Though Horus would slay his old friend, he would quickly succumb to the Anatheme's influence, collapsing before his sons from the seemingly minor wound, his Primarch physiology barely holding on to life. His sons acted quickly and without thought, rushing him to his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, with the panic only sons can feel. Desperate to save their father, they would turn to anyone that might offer a way to save him. Having already embedded himself in the hierarchy of the Sons of Horus, Erebus had gained the trust of Horus and his men, using the lodges to place doubts in their hearts and solidify his position as a source of wisdom and reassurance. So when the first chaplain of the Wordbearers suggested that he knew something that could save the War Master, they listened. Despite the danger, as well as protests from Captains Loken and Torgadon, Little Horus Aximand and First Captain Abaddon took their father to the temple of the Serpent Lodge on the world below, allowing their father to be taken behind the doors to a fate unknown. The hope that their father might be returned to health, too great for them to resist. Within the lodge, Horus would be greeted with trickery. Erebus, through sorcerous means, had insinuated himself into the visions that he saw, and used them to twist Horus to the path chosen for him, showing him a hellish vision of the future that would be, one where he was all but forgotten. Horus was given a choice: turn from the Emperor who would abandon you, or die. And though his brother Magnus, casting his spirit to Horus from half a galaxy away, would plead with Horus to choose the path of loyalty, Horus instead chose to live. Revivified by the powers of chaos, Horus would leave the Serpent Lodge with a fire of new purpose within him. That fire would spread through all the worlds of the Imperium, burning all that would not submit to his rule. Brother would kill brother, Space Marine slaughter Space Marine. The heresy to come would kill trillions of men, women, and children alike as the Imperium made war on itself. But despite the magnitude of this betrayal, it was not Horus himself that killed the Emperor's dream. It was Magnus the Red. Having seen the treachery of Horus firsthand, the Emperor's most psychically potent son wished desperately to warn his father. But he also saw an opportunity. The Council of Nicaea had stripped the legions of the ability to use their psychic might, and the Librarius project had been shelved. What would the Emperor do, Magnus thought, if it was that very psychic potency that was able to warn him of the betrayal to come? Surely he would reverse his decision, see reason, and allow the legions to once again openly show their psychic abilities. Magnus conducted a ritual to project his consciousness across the galaxy to the Emperor, eager to warn his father personally of the imminent danger. His psyche screamed across the warp and void, a red comet set on a single course, the Imperial Palace. To most psychic beings, be they physical or metaphysical, the Imperial Palace and the Webway was a sealed box, warded and chained against all intrusion. For good reason too. The Emperor's Webway project was beyond fragile, its wards essential for keeping the forces of the Chaos Gods at bay, and Magnus almost failed. Unable to breach the web of intricate pathways, every pound of his fist on the walls was the death of a dozen thralls, their lives fueling his psychic ascent. At the last moment, though, Magnus felt something shift around him. Ancient and without form. In his arrogance, he believed this to simply be power, uncorrupted, and to be wielded by those who could. Never did he stop to think that it could be using him. Drawing from this well of power, he tore his way into the webway, leaving a screaming hole in his wake as he shot towards Terra with damnation in tow. A form pressed its way through the portal. Massive, red, and aflame with the burning force of its journey, it emerged into the chamber, wreathed in eldritch fire that bled away to reveal a robed being composed of many-angled light and the substance of stars. Its radiance was blinding, and none could look upon its many eyes without feeling the insignificance of their own mortality. None had ever seen such a dreadful apparition, the true heart of a being so mighty that it could only beat while encased in super-engineered flesh. The Emperor alone recognized this rapturous angel, and his heart broke to see it. "Magnus," he said.
"Father,"
replied Magnus. Their minds met, and in that moment of frozen connection, the galaxy changed forever. Though less than a minute has passed, by the time he tears into the central chamber, the burning avatar of Magnus the Red is gone, driven back by the onslaught of the 10,000 and the revelation of its own catastrophic success. In the wake of Magnus's banishment, disorder reigns. The webway gate is a wound wrenched wide, vomiting inhumanity into the throne room. Things, creatures that use humanity only as a mocking baseline from which to diverge, spill into reality, exalted by Magnus, arrogantly tearing open the path before them.
"To the Emperor!"
Constantine is shouting above the uproar as he spins and cleaves and carves and kills.
"To the Emperor's side!"
The Emperor is already ringed by 15 of his golden elite. Khan is one of them, and Diocletian is halfway to his king's side when the Emperor throws his hand forward. Fingers curled into a claw, as if he can tear at the webway portal from where he stands. Dio sees the scream in his king's frantic stare before it leaves the Emperor's lips.
"Into the breach!"
The Master of Mankind cries out, and his voice is broken, heart-struck. He wears the face of a man watching his hopes die. Magnus breaching the webway seals the fate of the Emperor's plans. Had the heresy occurred as it had without this event, something at least may have been salvageable despite the doubts as to its viability in the first place. His plan for the ascendance of humanity was ruined. The heresy would play out from here. A decade of civil war during which half of the Imperium made war on the other. 1,000,000 worlds in turmoil. The burning of Prospero, the corruption of half of the Primarchs, the battles of Istvan III and V, the schism of Mars, betrayal at Calth, Shadow War, Solar War, Imperium Secundus, Morlech, and finally the Siege of Terra. This battle would be just under half a year of hell for the defenders of Terra, and the final confrontation aboard the War Master's flagship would leave Horus dead and the Emperor mortally wounded. Billions of lives were lost, countless pieces of priceless technology destroyed, and lore beyond counting burned. The dust settled on an empire without purpose, its emperor interred on the Golden Throne, never to speak again, his guardians retreating from all view as they mourned the one that they were made to protect. And in the wake of this cataclysm, faith grew. Humanity needs to believe in something. And as they watched the imperial truth that they had placed their faith in die, they turned to a new deity, the Emperor. By the end of the siege, the new church had a foothold on Terra itself, the sheer desperation of the moment forcing many to its teachings for comfort. From here it would spread outwards, unstoppable, inexorable, a wave of faith to illuminate the dark reality of their lives. The age of rebirth had begun. Over the next 1,000 years, the imperial cult would spread, its power growing behind the scenes as more and more planets were brought into its influence. Worship of the Emperor, once persecuted against and actively punished, could no longer be suppressed. And in M32, shortly before the end of the Age of Rebirth, the Adeptus Ministorum was officially established, recognized as the state religion and ratified by the High Lords of Terra. Solidified as a pillar of the state, it was not long before it was given a permanent seat amongst the High Lords themselves, able to dictate imperial policy as they saw fit. The Emperor's vision for humanity's future was broken, and it would continue to move further and further away from his original ideal, even as he suffered on the throne for it. Ancient carrion birds of thought and hate digging at his exposed soul, even as he held back the tide of demons that Magnus had unleashed with his folly. I don't know whether or not there was ever really hope for the Emperor's vision. In many ways it was flawed from the start, blinded by the experiences of that boy from so long ago who held his father's skull in his hands. In the 41st millennium, Mankind is not ruled by those with the wisdom to guide them. It has been dominated by the strong, the selfish, and the greedy, trillions oppressed by men and women who would sacrifice them all just to keep their place at the table. And the Webway project? Even though it was ruined by Magnus, it's doubtful if it would have ever worked. Despite the Emperor's formidable foresight, he could only ever see potential destinations. Nothing was certain. In Echoes of Eternity, Vulcan even comments that what has been done would not last. Vulcan ran his hand along the walls of Martian iron and inlaid suppressive circuitry. It penetrated his gauntlets, sending a weak tingle through his fingertips. I do not know if this ever would have worked. Not for long. Perhaps not even for long enough. Imperfect. That was the word. Imperfect. When nothing less than perfection would suffice. And what if his father had come to him? Would he have been able to turn his mastery to this realm beyond reality? Would his brother Ferris have been able to help him? Would Magnus have joined them, forming a triumvirate of visionaries devoted to constructing the bridge to mankind's destiny? No. No. There was nothing he could have done here. Of that, he was certain. After the heresy, the Imperium would enter the Age of Rebirth, then the Forging, the Nova Terra Interregnum, the Age of Apostasy, the Age of Redemption, the Waning, and finally we come to the time of ending. The Imperium would continue to stagnate, its culture strangled by faith, technology rotting away under the weight of ignorance, secrecy and ritual, and people sacrificed on the altar of the Emperor's glory. It is in this age that we find the Imperium, its ideals perverted, its people oppressed, crumbling slowly into the grave dug by the Emperor's own sons.
And in this new age, there is only war.